We tend to think of reading as just decoding words on a page. But what if the real challenge, the real art, is teaching students how to make meaning from them? Today, we're going to break down a super useful framework to do just that, to teach true interpretive reading.
It seems like such a simple question, right? But think about it. Is reading just about recognizing symbols? Or is it about connecting with another human mind, maybe from a totally different time and place? Answering that question is really the key to teaching it well.
So that gets us to this core idea of meaning making, and it's not a passive thing at all. It's an active process, sometimes even a struggle, to understand what an author is trying to say, especially when they're from a different culture, using words you don't know. Just recognizing that it's a challenge is the first big step in helping our students succeed.
So how do we tackle this? Well, we've got a simple, memorable framework, the 4 T's. We're going to walk through each one. We'll start with the text itself, then move on to designing the right task, then how we actually approach the teaching, and finally, we'll wrap up with assessment.
Think of this whole thing as a roadmap for pretty much any reading lesson. And what's great is that each step builds logically on the one before it. It gives you a really clear path all the way from picking out a piece of writing to actually knowing what your students got out of it.
All right, first up, the text. This is the absolute foundation of the entire lesson. Seriously, the material you choose is going to shape every single thing that comes after. No pressure.
Okay, so the first big decision you've got is choosing between 2 types of text. On one hand, you have authentic text, stuff from the real world, like a restaurant menu or a news article. On the other hand, you have created texts, which are made just for the classroom. Now, the end goal is always to get students reading authentic stuff, but let's be real. For beginners, we often need to create simpler texts to build their skills and confidence first.
But it's not just about whether it's authentic or created. You also have to think about a bunch of other things, like its length, its genre, and the cultural context. Is it a short, punchy ad or a long, complex story? Each of these choices helps target a different skill, and using a variety of them is what builds really flexible, resilient readers.
So once you have your text picked out, we move to the second T, the task. This is where we ask, what are we actually going to have the students do with this text? This is the critical step that turns them from passive readers into active thinkers.
A great reading task is so much more than just a comprehension quiz. It has to have a clear purpose. Are we practicing a specific skill, like skimming for the main idea? Or are we maybe using this text to set up a bigger writing project later on? The task is what gives the reading its why.
And here it is, the golden rule. The learning goal always comes first. Every single task you design has to serve that goal. So if your goal is for students to understand how to use a map, the task shouldn't be to define compass rows. It's to actually give directions. The task has to mirror the goal. Simple as that.
All right, on to our third T, teaching. So we've got the perfect text and a really purposeful task. Now, how do we actually guide our students through that meaning-making process we talked about?
It's so easy to fall into the trap of thinking that if students just know the vocabulary and the grammar, they should get the text. But that is only half the battle. The other half is all the invisible stuff, the background knowledge, the cultural context, the reading strategies. And that stuff doesn't just happen by magic, it has to be explicitly taught.
A really solid reading lesson pretty much always follows these 3 phases. First, in pre-reading, you get their brains warmed up, activating what they already know. Then comes the initial reading, where they just get the gist of it. And finally, and this part is so important, they reread. They go back into the text with a specific mission, to hunt for details and really deepen their understanding.
And that brings us to our final T, assessment. And honestly, this can be the trickiest part of the whole thing. I mean, how do you measure something that's happening inside a student's head?
Just think about it for a second. When we assess speaking or writing, we have a tangible product, right? We can see the essay, we can hear the speech, but reading comprehension is totally internal. It's invisible. So our challenge as teachers is to design tasks that make that hidden understanding visible.
This leads to a really interesting and maybe surprising point. We're used to using rubrics for everything, right? Well, for interpretive reading, we generally don't. And why is that? Well, for a lot of comprehension tasks, the answer isn't on some spectrum of quality. It's simply right or wrong. Do they find the right detail or not? It's a completely different ballgame.
So if we aren't using rubrics, what do we assess? Well, guidelines from ACTFL, that's the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, point to these 4 really concrete skills. Can the student pick out key words? Can they summarize the main idea?
Can they find the details that back it up? Our assessment should be built around these very specific, observable things.
So, let's bring this all home. By deliberately thinking about the text, designing a purposeful task, providing explicit teaching, and using a focused assessment, we can move our students way beyond just decoding words. We can systematically build them into powerful, confident readers. At the end of the day, a text is just ink on a page until a reader comes along and brings it to life. Our job is to give our students the keys to unlock all that meaning. This framework, text, task, teaching, and assessment, that's your set of keys. So the only question left is, what doors to understanding will you help your students open next?